السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عليه. Inshallah, we are going to go ahead and just get started. I know we're a little bit behind, so I won't do too much talking on my end. But we are very happy, inshallah, to be closing out the Quranic Families series. For those of you that have been coming for the past 3 Saturdays of Ramadan after Dhuhr, we've been having a series on the topic of Quranic families. How we can make ourselves and our families more Quranic, how we can become families like that of our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how we can better our relationships amongst ourselves, that first very nuclear unit of the community, inshallah. And so we started with talking about what is a Quranic family. We talked a little bit about the environment around us. And today we have a very important topic, which is that of conflict and disputes. Every family has conflicts and disputes. And so today I'm very honored to introduce Imam Abdul Malik Merchant, who some of you may know. He is one of the Imams here at Adams, as well as at Mass, right down the street, who will be talking on this subject. And without any further ado, Imam, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم صل وسلم وأنعم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم علمنا من علمك ما ترضى به عنا ولا تؤاخذنا بما تعلمه منا. يا حليم خلقنا بخلق الحلم وحققنا بحقائق العلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Jazakumullah khair, everyone, for coming out on after Dhuhr in Ramadan, which means that most of us probably just woke up. But may Allah bless you all. The topic that I've been given to talk about, as you've just heard from Noor, may Allah bless him, is overcoming challenges in the Quranic family in the light of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I think before we talk about families and challenges in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have to understand that families happen, as they talk about family systems theories, in a dyad. They happen in a system, that each part of the system is impacted and affected by the other. When one part of this dyad, one part of the system is going through a challenge, it has a ripple effect on other parts of the family. And so when we're thinking about the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his life and what he went through, what he existed with, we have to also try to take, or any story for that matter, from the seerah or from our Islamic history, we have to try to understand who are the people around him as well. How are they impacted by these things? And how can we see ourselves in these stories? How can we connect with these stories so that it's impactful for us? So that we're able to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, so that we can be that way in our own families. And so before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a prophet, what was his family system? Before the bi'athah, before revelation. He was someone who grew up as an orphan. In the first 6 years of his life, he was raised in the desert as it was Arab customs, where he was perfected his Arabic and good character. And we have the story of Halima Sa'diyah and the cleaning of his heart and those things. But we know then his mother passed, and he was raised by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who was the head of the tribe, who then passed as well. him out on a business trip, he came back with twice as much as he was supposed to. For that also has a dynamic. And Sayyidah Khadija was the mother of all of his children, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this all happens before the age of 40. Before the age of 40, he loses both of his parents. He loses his grandfather who raised him for some years. Then grew up in this difficult household, but still had amazing character. And then was known amongst his people. There's the story of the black stone that he helped. He was the arbiter of that. So he also was respected in the community because of this. And then he marries his wife, Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha, and they have children together. And she was a noble person in the tribe. Not just by lineage, but also due to social status. She had money, radiallahu anha. And so, this is something that quickly becomes destabilized. Immediately at the age of 40, immediately when he receives revelation, everything is shifted. He now receives revelation, and he has to deal with things that are very unique. Coming down from the mountain, coming down, he goes straight to his wife and he says, cover me, cover me. Feeling the difficulty and the fear and the scare of what's just happening. That's a destabilizing event that creates challenges in the family. His wife, radiallahu anha, was absolutely amazing, and she's the one who made him feel comfortable initially. She says, don't worry, Allah will never forsake you because of who you are. You take care of the orphans, you don't cut off your family ties, etc., etc. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so, think about how that the next few months between Iqra and Mudathir, of how he sallallahu is in fear, thinking now that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forsaken him, thinking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't send revelation again. His anxiety, his unsettledness, we'll say, of this, how does that impact Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha? How does that impact Sayyidah Fatima? What's going on in the family with everyone else? And how does that allow us to connect with our family, whether it be our spouses or our children, when we're going through difficult times? We haven't even gotten to the big ones yet. But just when things are uneasy. I was somewhere a few nights ago, and my wife is there, and we're all together, and I see a mouse. And so she's talking to me. I said, don't talk. Don't talk right now. I'm not too scared of mice. A little bit, I have to be honest. But I know she's very scared. The sister who is next to her is very scared. And the brother's next to scared, more scared than both of them. I know this. So don't talk. So I was like, why are you being rude? And so, of course, on the whole ride home, I get the silent treatment. So finally we got home, out of earshot of the kids. I said, babe, I'm sorry, I was anxious. She was like, but you didn't have to be rude. I said, I saw a mouse. I was like, oh my God. I said, I saw this mouse, and I knew that if I said anything, or if you saw the mouse, then the whole situation would have been messed up. And so I shouldn't have responded that way, but that was the only way that I could control my anxiety and the fear of that time. It's a small thing. But how something as small as a mouse can destabilize an entire family. Where now my wife is upset with me because I responded in somewhat of an aggressive tone, and she doesn't want to, she's upset. The whole thing. But now the Prophet ﷺ receives revelation. And finally, when he's commanded to go out and speak and disseminate this message, not something private anymore, he's telling other people. He goes on the mountain, and in front of everyone he says, if I told you there was an army on the other side of the mountain, would you believe me? They said, of course, you are the truthful one. He said, well, I tell you that I'm a prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm here to give you to tell you that, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and don't associate partners with him. Who's the first person who causes problems for him? Who's the first person who challenges this? And let's be honest, who disrespects him in front of everyone? It's one thing if your family members pull you aside and they rebuke you by yourself. It hurts, it'll sting. But it's another thing if you're in front of everyone that you know. We have to contextualize things. We're talking about the Prophet ﷺ in a time where Mecca was a small town. Think of perhaps the villages our parents originally come from. Think of America 100 years ago, where everyone in your town knows everyone. My mom tells me stories of that. When they were in D.C. in the 70s and the 80s, if something happened, before they got home, the parents knew. Because of the auntie network and the uncles that I saw your daughter here, I saw your daughter there. So imagine even smaller time, where everyone knows you, and then you've grown to have this prestige in the community, and your own uncle says, "Tabban lak, ali hadha jama'tana," which can't be translated to Tabban lak is what, if you watch like Arab soap operas or Arabic movies, all curse words get translated as Tabban lak. All curse words, that's it. But literally it's like, damn you. Is this why you brought us together? So imagine that impact, that blow of the Prophet ﷺ by his own uncle, cursing him in front of everyone, embarrassing him in front of everyone. We know just from this, the animosity and resistance is going to happen in our lives. It's a part of the human condition. It's not even specific to Muslims. We're all going to go through difficulties and challenges in multiple parts of our life. And if we look at the story of all the prophets, not just the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they were all tested with those that were closest to them. Whether it was Yusuf alayhi salam, who was taken away from his father, that's a test. Taken away from his brother, a test. Some of the ulama say that his mother died before all this stuff happened, a test. Then his own biological brothers kidnapped him, a test. They left him, abandoned him, threw him in a well, another test by the hands of his brother. He's sold into slavery. His adopted stepmom, his adopted mother, then abuses him. If we were to use modern language, his adopted mother sexually abuses him. Another test. If we're to look at Nuh alayhi salam and his son, if we look at Lut, his wife, if we look at Musa alayhi salam, he's taken away from his mother. All of the prophets are going through challenges time and time again, and it's going to happen. And so we need to change how we think about our families. We need to change of how even we connect with our families. Do we look at our families as safe havens that should be pristine and we're never challenged in them? We never go through difficulty. Or do we look at them as just a part of a family system, a part of people that we lived with, and that we're all trying to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with? And in that, there are going to be some challenges, but my struggle is, how do I remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this? How do I help them be better? And then how do I help myself be better and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that difficulty? Again, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has this happen throughout his life at every single stage. But then after receiving revelation, his own uncle is the one who curses him and embarrasses him in front of everyone else. Did that change him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in how he connected with them? Did that change him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in stopping being merciful? Did that change him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in how he treated his family or other people? Because again, as we're going to talk about over and over again, these things have ripple effects. You're embarrassed and cursed in front of everyone you know and trust, then it's only natural that you come home and you're, like when I saw the mouse, you're a little bit agitated, you're a little bit thrown off. But he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was the best of all creation. وَمَا بُعِثْتُ لِإِتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. He said, I was not sent except to complete noble character. We know that he was above all of these superficial things and bad behavior, as I showed. So then, a few years later, he's teaching and disseminating in spreading Islam. And he's continually challenged by those close to him. Everyone he knows, they're calling him a magician. They're calling him crazy. He then wants his uncle to embrace Islam, and they come behind him and conspire to convince his uncle not to embrace Islam. And in the same time, his uncle wasn't just a person who raised him, he also was a protector of his. He also was someone who defended Islam. So he financially helped fund the Muslim community, but he also, due to his social connection, protected the Prophet ﷺ and the early Muslims from being challenged. In the same time, they get placed in embargo. They get kicked out of the city of Mecca, that nothing can come in or nothing can come out. They're not able to get married or anything. His uncle passes. And he doesn't embrace Islam in an external way that we know of. Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha passed. He comes back from Ta'if. He gets kicked out of the very famous story that we know. All this is happening around the same time. Family member who raised him, protected him, funded the community, his wife, mother of his children, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, radiallahu anha, wife of 25 years, passed. With Abu Talib, he's hurt. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the Quran, the ayah, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You do not guide those whom you love. And so when we're thinking about our families and overcoming challenges, Can we embrace the fact that we don't have the ability to change anyone, to force anyone to do or be anything? And can we love them for who they are? Can we love our wives and our children and our husbands simply for who they are, not what necessarily we wish and hope they could be? Because if the Prophet ﷺ couldn't get his beloved uncle who raised him, his uncle who protected him, etc., as we've already mentioned ad nauseum, if he couldn't get him to embrace Islam, he couldn't get it, and this is the best of creation, Habibullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If he couldn't do that, what about us? When we're thinking about our children disobeying us, when we're thinking about the things that perhaps are less pleasing from our spouses, when we're thinking about family and friends who are a bit challenging to deal with, but because of social connections, we have to be with them. Sometimes that creates its own sense of depression or anxiety or frustration, because I wish they would just listen. I know that if they just did this, their lives would be better. But we don't have control over that. And so can we surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and embrace the fact that this is beyond our capacity? This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed. Does that mean we exhaust our means? No. The Prophet ﷺ went to Abu Talib on his deathbed and gave him da'wah. He never stopped. Excuse me. He never stopped giving da'wah. He never stopped calling him. Did that incapacitate the Prophet ﷺ? Did the Prophet ﷺ give up? Did he lose hope? Did he stop with the message? He didn't do that either. So we exhaust our means. We do as much as we can, but we leave our trust ultimately in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The passing of Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha, another huge hit to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who's now a single father. He wasn't married to anyone else when he was married to Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha. So he's now a single father, a divorcee with children, trying to help console them, trying to make sure they're comfortable, they're okay. At the same time, leading a new ummah, leading a nation of people. That's a difficulty on top of difficulty. How does he deal with those pressures? Think about us when we come home from our long days of work. Perhaps we have a side hustle, and so we do that for some time. We come home and our spouses and our children, they want our attention, and we're mentally drained. How patient or how short is our patience? How do we interact with others? How do we deal with them when we're going through these different difficulties? So what about the Prophet ﷺ? When he's having lost a wife, the mother of his children. May Allah protect all of us, for those of us who have never experienced it, and bring peace and happiness to all of us who have. But maybe the closest thing we could bring to that is what we've seen in movies. Of the difficulty of a single parent in trying to carry the burden of someone else, of a child, and trying to keep that in, staying strong for them, so they don't have to feel the extra pressure of the parent. So when we're going through difficult times, and we feel times of loss, because inevitably we're going to have times of qabd and bast. We're going to have times of restriction and times of ease. So when we find ourselves in these times of restriction, where it feels like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sucked the air out the room, where everything that we want, where everything that we aspire toward, things just aren't happening. There's red light after red light. It's a challenging time. What's our disposition? How do we deal with those that are around us? How do we treat our family and our loved ones? Can we communicate our needs? Can we communicate our emotions so that at least they can understand and have a window into what we're going through? Or do we deal with them in harshness and difficulty and we cause more problems than we absolutely need? As time goes on, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the early community, they migrate to Medina. Dr. Sherman Jackson has a very famous speech that if I would prepare it better, I would have had that for you to watch, where he's giving a talk at a Mawlid. About halfway through, he mentions how every year after the Hijrah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there is a personal calamity that happens to him. Children dying. Cousins coming back from the first Hijrah to Habasha dying. Another person dying. Battle and death. Every single year, he highlights with an example. And one of those examples is the ifk of Aisha. The slander of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. Imagine. for any one of us and who we are. Forget the Prophet ﷺ for 1 second. Imagine one of us and our loved ones are accused of adultery or accused of not being honorable to our families. How would that make us feel? Let's bring it home. Imagine we see our loved one talking to someone they shouldn't be talking to on social media, in the DMs or whatever. How does that make us feel? May Allah protect all of us. Why? That's bad. It hurts. It's going to create some unease, some instability in the family. You may need counseling. How do we work through this? One has to change behaviors. The other has to process. How do we rebuild trust? Etc. Imagine this is now something that becomes viral. Everyone now has screenshots of this conversation. And it's only part of the conversation. And everyone is now talking about this here at the Adam Center, in the DMV. It's in WhatsApp groups. They're saying, did you hear what happened to Abdul Malik and his wife? Did you hear what's going on? Now, magnify that when you're, God forbid, Imam Majid, for example, the Imam of the community, who's 25 years in. May Allah protect Imam Majid and his family. All of our families. It becomes a bigger thing, though. This is Imam Majid. What? He's counseled me. This is humongous. How does it have an impact on the community? Imagine the Prophet ﷺ, the one who revelation comes down to. And this is your wife, Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, who practically was groomed by you sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is viral in the community. Everyone's talking about it. Some people defend the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say, Aisha, no, it can't happen. Others go on the opposite extreme. Or not extreme, they take the opposite position. They're slandering. They're spreading the gossip. Even one of her first cousins is slandering, spreading the gossip. And you have others that don't say anything. If you're in this situation, how would you feel? This is exponentially bigger. Now, from the perspective of Aisha radiallahu anha, we know how she felt. She narrates the hadith, where she then tries, the Prophet ﷺ, in being just, doesn't take a position. He's waiting for revelation, and it doesn't come. And so, he's not just a husband who's in pain that this is happening to his wife, but he's also the messenger and the governor of the city. So he can't say, and he can't take a position, because then that wouldn't be just. Oh, you're biased because it's your wife. So he doesn't say anything. He doesn't defend his wife. How does Aisha feel, radiallahu anha? The Prophet ﷺ doesn't come to her rescue. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't defend her in front of everyone. She then goes to her father and her mother and brings them for some mediation. Pause here for a second. When we're going through difficulties, do we do that? Do we seek mediation? Do we try to bring in trusted people to help resolve the situation? Or do we talk to our friends and we gossip and we cause more problems? She brings in her parents, trying to advocate on her behalf. And the Prophet ﷺ doesn't take a position. And she very famously says, and then the Prophet ﷺ says, just tell him, you take a position. He tells Aisha, tell them you didn't do anything. She said, this is a lie against me. If I say something, if I say that I didn't do it, people are going to say I didn't do it. Excuse me, if I say I didn't do it, people say I did do it. I'm just defending myself. And if I say that I did do it and I didn't do it, then they'll continue with the rumors. So I leave my trust to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a strong position. And then she goes on a month, 2 months perhaps, in this state of limbo, where there's no revelation. People are gossiping about her in the city. We're going to have instabilities in our families. Sometimes in the closest way, sometimes in the most sensitive of ways. How and what does this do? And how do we recover from it? Do we put our trust in the people that we've had no problems with for all these years? Do we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most gracious and most merciful? Do we seek mediation to deal with these challenges? Or is it we're burning the house down and everything in it? How do we deal with these challenges? Aisha radiallahu anha was free from all of these things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, sends down a verse freeing her. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ جَاءُوا بِالْإِفْكِ عُصْبَةٌ مِّنْكُمْ وَلَا تَحْسَبُوهُ شَرًّا لَكُمْ بَلْ هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ those that are coming with this slander, عُصْبَةٌ مِّنْكُمْ, that you are free from. لَا تَحْسَبُوهُ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ بَلْ هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Don't look at it as something bad for you, as something evil against you. Rather, it's good for you. This is the verse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down. So when we're going through difficulties, while they undoubtedly hurt, undoubtedly painful, can we look at them as opportunities to grow in ourselves and who we are? Opportunities to grow in our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Opportunities to grow in our families? How do we fortify this from not happening again? How do we seek help to ensure that there are no more problems? What do we do? So, there's another big fitna that happens that the Prophet ﷺ, we can learn from that. In times of fitna, we have to remain principled. The Prophet ﷺ, when this happened, he stayed principled. And then there was the family dynamic that happened. There's the community, there's them as a couple, there's them as a parent. How does Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha? How does she feel about this? How do the other children of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ feel about what's going on with their stepmom and with their father? And the fitna that's going on in the community. How do we ensure that our children aren't negatively impacted by these things, that are protected from these things? And so these are just a few vignettes that we want to share from the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and from the Quran of how we can deal with challenges in families and how we can think about the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But we have to remember that if he ﷺ wasn't free from difficulties, and we can remember that he ﷺ wasn't free from challenges, what about us? Can we reframe how we interact with our difficulties and challenges? On whatever level of difficulties they are, whether it's our parents, our children, our spouses, aunties and uncles, family members, etc. Can we remain principled? Can we remain people that have good character, like the Prophet ﷺ? I thought one of the brothers was bringing me water, and I was like, oh, Jazakallah khair. Oh no, he can't be bringing water fasting. Allah. May Allah accept all of our fasting. So can we remain principled? Can we remain thoughtful? Can we remain humble? Can we remain and just embrace this fact? As one of the Shaykh Yasir Fahmi, may Allah bless and preserve him, he always used to mention the ayah, the line of poetry, وَفِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ آيَةٌ تَدُلُّ عَلَىٰ أَنَّهُ وَاحِدٌ. And every single thing is a sign that proves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. Can we shift how we engage with difficulties so that they now are opportunities for us to grow? Can we remove the expectations that we perhaps placed on our spouses? I was doing marriage counseling earlier this week with a couple, and subhanAllah, listen, it's amazing. May Allah bless them. A non-Muslim family comes to the masjid. My boss calls me and he says, listen, there's a couple here who wants to talk to you. The woman is wearing hijab. They're meeting me after iftar. I say, Salaam alaikum, wa alaikum salam. They sit down and say, okay, first and foremost, we're not Muslim. You're not Muslim. Okay, cool. And we don't have a problem. Okay, cool. How can I help you? We're here for our friends. Okay. They're going through some marital problems. I said, okay. We want you to make dua for them. I was like, whoa. You are amazing, first and foremost. Allah bless you guys. You're not Muslim. You love your friends so much. You came to the masjid. Come to find out they came the day before, like at Asr time or at Dhuhr time. And everyone knows the Imams were not at the masjid during Ramadan at Dhuhr time. And so someone told them, come at iftar. So they came at iftar. They waited for 20 minutes because I was somewhere else. And they said, we just wanted you to make dua for them. I said, no. I want to meet you guys. So you can come on Wednesday. So I get to the house. And immediately I recognized when I opened the door that the couple had no clue I was coming. I was like, oh my God. What am I getting into? As soon as I opened the door, the husband's like, Assalamu alaikum. The wife goes and fixes her hijab. And so we sit down and we're eating, and they're very private. They don't want to talk about it. So the friend says, can you tell us the rights of a spouse and a wife? So we start talking. And I mentioned that if we have expectations, when we start to lower our expectations, when we start to love our spouses for who they are, we love our family members for who they are and all their complexities, not focus on the things we don't like, but the things we do like, then that can dynamically change our relationships. And so, subhanAllah, the woman who asked me to come, she didn't have the problem. She said, man, and she looked at her husband. She said, yeah, that's so true. He says, what? You have these feelings about me too? It's inevitable. It's a part of our human condition that we're going to have challenges. But can we change our expectations? That we can love each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can love each other because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with these difficulties. He's blessed us with these families as opportunities to grow, as opportunities to become stronger, in how difficult they may be. That's the aunts and uncles who don't understand your cultural situation. They don't understand you being first, second, third generation because they grew up in a different time. They don't understand our sensitivities toward emotions because they didn't deal with emotions that way before. Maybe they don't understand the decisions you're trying to make because they don't agree with them on whatever level. Or it's the opposite. You are the auntie and uncle who can't seem to empathize with what's going on. How do we use these opportunities to come together as a family? How do we use these opportunities to connect deeper? How do we use these as possibilities to grow? A friend of mine put we have a guy's group chat. He says, listen, every time I'm leaving the house, my wife asks me to do something. So as soon as I put my shoes on, oh, babe, I need to do something. And it's driving me crazy. He said, and don't tell me to mention to her, I told her already, babe, please don't do that. And so I said, maybe you have to shift how you deal with it. He said, well, how do I do that? I've told her I don't like it. It only made problems. I don't want to make more problems, but I'm going crazy because every time I'm leaving the house, I said, have you ever thought of the fact that perhaps she just loves you? And she's a little bit anxious of you leaving the house now. So to keep you for 30 seconds more, she says, honey, can you do this? Or baby, can you do that? He said, that doesn't fix my problem. It's real sweet, but I still am hella annoyed. I said, have you ever sat her down and told her how it makes you feel? And told her that it's a challenge for you. And now this causes you anxiety because you're going to be late for your appointment, but you're now wrestling. Do I make my wife happy? Do I be late? How do I do with those things? So another brother, mashallah, he's a very thoughtful person. He said, well, I have a hierarchy of needs. Is it something I must do but I don't need to do now, or I don't need to do but someone else can do it? I said, listen, that's too much for me. Is this emergency that needs to be done now and everything else? If it's emergency, everything else needs to do, khalas, you have to be a little late. If it's not, then you communicate that well. But I said, bro, you have to sit down with your wife and explain to her how it makes you feel. By shifting the narrative from being, babe, please don't do that, to when you do that, it makes me feel bad. And not even accusing her, saying, babe, have you noticed that every time you leave the house, I'm going to leave the house, miraculously there's something else for me to do? And I'm sure it's because you love me, but when you do that, it makes me feel this kind of way. He was like, I never thought of it that way. I'm almost 100% sure the conversation will be far more fruitful than just saying, you do this, stop. So how do we shift even, not just, we talked about perspectives, how do we shift conversations? Particularly when they're tenuous, when they're difficult. How do we shift them from being, you're doing this, to this makes me feel this way? I've never had a conversation with my wife where I shifted from you are doing this to I feel this way, except the conversation went a lot better. I didn't necessarily get what I want, but things were far more peaceful. I had a young sister text me the other day. She's like 16, and Allah bless her. She says, Abdul Malik, I got this really bad situation here. So I was like, okay. Honorifics out the window, cool. She says, I get really upset, and then I get quiet. My mom doesn't like me getting quiet, so she pushes me to talk, and then I say something, my mom gets mad at me. This happens every single time, because now I'm rude. What do I do? I said, maybe you could just tell your mom, Mom, it's best for me not to talk now because I'm going to say something that bothers you, and maybe can we talk about it later? She's not going to like that response, but that'll allow her to at least understand you're not being quiet and ignoring her. They say, so you're saying just like, don't talk about it now? I said, no, do talk, but to a certain limit. Again, these are just small vignettes of how we can shift our conversations and our thoughts, removing expectations, and then once we're trying to remove the expectations, shifting how it is that we're talking. Because all of this at the end of the day are opportunities for us to learn who we are. They're opportunities for us to grow. And if we have a sincere intention, it becomes ibadah. It becomes tazkiyah for our own selves. We're purifying ourselves for the sake of the larger picture. If we go into our relationships, at whatever level they are, parents, children, spouses, cousins, family, whatever, deep or wide, simply about what I can get from it, then that's as superficial as a relationship is going to be. But if we can shift our perspective, how we think of these things, to being, how can I connect now? How can I earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure? How can I help this person grow and me grow in this process? Then that will enable everyone to be uplifted. And now you have the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going through it. It's ibadah, etc. And so again, these are just a few things that if we can reshape our focus, focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our difficult times, being thoughtful about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the challenges that we're having, understanding that challenges are inevitable. We're going to go through them. It's a part of the human condition, not just Muslims. And the best of people that ever walked the face of the earth had the greatest tests, and we see them in the Quran, in the Sunnah. And so we shouldn't think that or expect that our lives are any different. Rather, we should expect that we have the exact same thing. And so if that's the expectation, how do we deal with it? Removing expectations and shifting the perspective, the narrative, how we communicate with each other. Bettering how we think about ourselves or how we think internally, and then bettering what we do. At the end of the day, this is all of what our spiritual path is about anyways. It's takhliya, removing negativity, or tahliya, adding on positivity, adornment. And so this doesn't change whether it's in our ibadah, and we're trying to have more khushu' in our prayer. This doesn't change in our reading Quran or our own personal adab, but also in our human interactions as well. But we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our families. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our families, to shower us and our loved ones with His grace and His mercy in these last 10 nights of Ramadan, to allow us to grow with our families, to grow as a community. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to overcome the evil that's within our own selves, our egos, to overcome our own sins and our poor behavior and our poor adab, so that we can be people that reflect the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people that can be like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and be a mercy to all of mankind in good times and in ease. People that advocate for what they need, but in the best way possible. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our children, to protect this next generation, allow them to know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and love His beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our communities communities of light, communities of love, communities of mercy, communities of service, communities that are reflecting the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that only allow the next generation to overcome challenges and deal with difficulties and want to be Muslim, loving, happy. I open the floor for questions, comments. Do we have time for questions? Open the floor for questions, comments, critiques, feedback, inshallah. This is a hypothetical. It's a very good question. The question is for everyone over here. What do you do when you know you're in the right? You've got dalil, but the other person doesn't believe it. So, first and foremost, what's the nature of this conversation? The other morning after Fajr, my wife and I are having a conversation about East African politics. What tribe is from this tribe and after whatever. Now, I know that I was right. Like, I've read the books. And she's trying to explain to me that I'm not right. And I'm saying, well, your frame is off. Either you're looking at it from a tribal perspective, or you're looking at it from a geopolitical perspective. You gotta pick one. She's explaining to me, nope, you don't get it. You're not Ethiopian, so you don't understand. I realize this is after Fajr. We haven't slept. It doesn't matter. I said, sure, babe. And went to sleep. Diffuse the whole situation. Pick your battles. But that was not something big. Imagine now that if it's a little bit bigger. Child's education. You've seen data, statistics. You have family members that have gone through certain experiences. And so now you're like, I know this is based on ghalabat al-dhann, like based on the most largest understanding that I can have. This is a good thing or bad thing. On either way. Pro public school, pro private school, homeschool, whatever. You have to have a conversation. And even if you know that you're right, we have to make sure a couple of things. One, we're not belittling the other person. You don't know. But rather, it's how can I get you to understand what I do know? How can I deal with you in a way where you get to see what I'm saying? That may mean that we have to step all the way back. Maybe a different time we have this conversation, we step all the way back from the conversation and we say, well, let me understand you a little bit more. Why are you speaking from your perspective? Where are you coming from for this? It's not always forcing what it is that we're trying to get across. It's trying to figure out how we can both arrive at the same place. Now, that's another level. Imagine there are accusations now that you've done something, you haven't done something, but you know that you did. First and foremost, how good is our memory? I did take out the trash, I swear. Sitting right there. But maybe you do have proof. Maybe you do know something is bad. And so then again, how do you deal with it? Removing the ego from the situation. A lot of times, a lot of our problems arise because we are offended by what is happening. It's hit a soft spot. I feel, whether it's insecure or I feel hurt, and now my ego's coming up, and I want to avenge my emotions that are coming up. Those aren't going to help the situation at hand, nor are they going to help me have more leverage to advocate anything. More likely than not, I'm going to be now trying to force something on the other person. Then I'm going to have bad adab. I'm going to harm some, perhaps, God forbid, say something that's harmful, etc. And so in those situations, the hope is that we can have enough wherewithal to recognize those things. We can have some muhasabah, some awareness of ourselves, where we can say, okay, this is my emotions. I'm going to, not saying disregard them, but put them aside. Because sometimes the emotions need to be addressed, and sometimes the situation at hand needs to be addressed. If there's, God forbid, something bad is about to happen, the kid's going to stick his finger in the socket, I don't know. And that's not a time to be like, oh, there's going to be some yelling, there's fast movement that happens, because this needs to happen based on that situation. You can apologize later, but I'm trying to fix this. At other times, maybe you can have a softer approach. But if we have to be aware of our own feelings in the situation so that we can deal with them adequately. Also, what is our role in the family? Our hierarchy basis, who makes decisions with regard to these things. In internal affairs, anything inside my house, I do not have the say. I've given that over completely to my wife. So when it comes to who's going where, please, I try to advocate and argue, try to get whatever, but at the end of the day, khalas, that's going to go right there. And so that's another thing to consider. So we said time, position, who is a decision maker in these things, and how can we advocate? We also mentioned emotions. I lost my train of thought, subhanAllah. I can't think of what else I was going to say, but I think we just figure out, it's never black and white. There's always a bunch, but again, recognizing our ego in the situation, recognizing our emotions. That's what I was saying, alhamdulillah. Sometimes we can put our emotions to the side and then come back later and say, you hurt me here. How you said that wasn't cool. It wasn't good. My wife, may Allah bless her, I was leaving to go to the masjid yesterday, and she told me about something that's going on in the world. And I was like, bro, come on, man. It's Ramadan. We really talking about this right now? What? Come on, man. And I saw her face immediately. I dismissed her, and she was upset. I was like, man. So when I left, I said, sorry, I gave her a kiss, I left, whatever. She texted me, she's like, you really hurt my feelings. I was like, my bad, dude. I'm so sorry. She's like, but I made dua for you instead of being mad. I was like, it was Ramadan. We had to have a conversation. In the moment, if we'd have fought that out, that could have been something. It could have become larger. I was rude to her. I was right. It wasn't something to talk about. How I did it wasn't well. And so that caused more problems. And so we just have to pick our battles, pick how we're going to communicate, and when we communicate. Yeah. Walaikum salam. There are a lot of unknowns, a lot of variables there. But to repeat the question, what do you do in a situation when a person recognizes they're wrong in a situation, but they're either not able to or unwilling to change? There's two things here. There's someone recognizing their faults to stop a fight. Halas, I'm good. I'm wrong. You're right. I'm wrong. I do it all the time. So, okay, I'm sorry. There's that happens. That may be recognizing they're wrong, but it may actually not be a deep recognition. Then there is addiction. That doesn't mean necessarily drugs, but like this is, or habits, part of child upbringing. This is a part of who I am or how I function with things. That is much more difficult to change. As the very old statement goes, you get more bees with honey than you do vinegar. So in that situation, I think we have to shift our perspective to being one that's sort of critical to then being one that's more loving, one that's more supportive. And even how the support needs to be specific. Because sometimes we can support in ways that others don't want to be supported. When I first married my wife, I was a student overseas, and she came to Mecca. She was about to pray her sunnah. We prayed together, and she was like, "You're not going to pray your sunnah?" I was like, "Yeah, inshallah." And she was like, "You don't pray your sunnah?" I was like, some fajr, sometimes. She was like, "I thought you were a student of knowledge." I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Astaghfirullah." She didn't ridicule me, though. She gave enough shame there where I felt bad. And then over the next 8 years, she was like, "I need to pray my sunnah." Until eventually, she was like, "Wait, did you just pray sunnah?" I was like, "Okay, mashallah." 6 months later, she trolled me, "You still praying your sunnahs?" There are different ways to deal with every situation. Sometimes it needs to be affectionate, loving, compassionate. Sometimes it has to be difficult and harsh and stern. We have to try to look and see who our spouse is. Perhaps even ask them, "How can I support you in this?" To help them get to what needs to happen. If someone genuinely understands something is wrong, and we don't see change, or they even perhaps say, "I'm unwilling to change," there needs to be some deeper digging. Why? What's there that they're unwilling to change? Is this a part of who they are, how they identify? Is this something they've been doing their entire life? Is this something they perhaps see your perspective but have a different perspective? And because they don't think that you're going to be able to understand, they're just admitting fault, etc. Is it, you see, there's endless means. I think having as decharged of a conversation as possible. In the best situation possible. You guys have dinner, you sit down, you say, "Listen, wallah," you start off with the disclaimer, I want to get somewhere better. Let's try to understand this. And then one of you owning the more responsible, in this situation, I'm going to put my ego to the side. Because inevitably, someone will get frustrated. But someone has to own, "Listen, this is not about ego. I really just want to help. I want to get to the core of this." If you come affectionately, you come lovingly for either gender, it's going to have a better effect. It's going to have a far bigger impact. Allah. And so when they don't recognize these things, that's the first step. You could do those things. Also mediation. You can ask for a third party to come in and be a translator. They're the mediator. When we sit in these situations, oftentimes we're not doing miracles. We're saying, "Brother, what she actually is saying is this. Sister, what he's actually saying is that. Couple layers low is because this makes him feel this way. Couple layers low, this makes her feel that way." And usually it goes back to very core things. She doesn't feel loved, she doesn't feel secure. He doesn't feel loved, he doesn't feel secure. In different ways. Usually it goes back to that. Whether that's he feels emasculated, he doesn't feel like he has autonomy, doesn't have authority, doesn't have a say, etc. She doesn't feel like you care about her, you're providing safety, it makes her feel unstable, whatever it means. A mediator's job is just to highlight those things, to provide some context, and then maybe say, "Well, maybe you guys can try this." Let's say, God forbid, there's no way to solve it. Now what? Is it something that breaks the camel's back and we're going to say, "I don't want to be in the situation"? 9 times out of 10, no. So if it's not, how do we deal with this? Does one person have to, in that situation, someone's going to be uncomfortable. How do I support you in your uncomfortability? Whether it's him giving up what he wants for the other person's sake, or you being patient and him finding ways to complement that situation so that you don't feel that way. I work a lot. I'm out of the house weird hours. I talk to people all the time. But on Mondays and Tuesdays when I'm not home, my wife has carte blanche to do whatever she wants. She will be gone 8 hours. Visit her parents, go shopping, get food with the friends. I can't say anything. That's like sacred. And if I need to do something on those days, I put in a permission slip. Hey, babe, I know. Can I make it up next week? We'll do something different. That has to be that way. You see what I'm saying? And so it's never going to be perfect. As Imam Shafi'i says, in the intidara sihha batala, that waiting for perfection is an impossibility, or is the word I'm looking for. It's not going to happen. And so, how do we make good with what? How do we make lemonade with lemons? So in a parental situation, what do? How do you get them to understand? You not tell them certain things just so that they don't have to have that conversation? Do they live with you? So there's so many dynamics, right? But the good news is that since Adam alayhi salam, people have had parents, and people have had to deal with these challenges. And so there is a way out of it in most situations. Obviously, there's trauma and abuse and abnormal situations. There are still ways. We don't talk to parents. We distance ourselves. There are things to do. But people have been dealing with this forever. And so, inshallah, be positive, be optimistic, be humble, be kind, and inshallah, we can find a way out of it. More time? خلاص. بارك الله فيكم. جزاكم الله خير.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you to Imam Malik, and thank you all for joining us. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, this is a beneficial series on this topic of Quranic families. Alhamdulillah. This is the last Saturday of Ramadan, so this will be the last session of the series. And I ask, in these last nights in which Allah accepts dua, in which we are forgiven, that firstly, we make dua for yourselves, and we make dua for our families, and Allah allows us to be closer together. Allah allows us to be more Quranic families, and that you make dua for our community. This here is an extended family, whether we like it or not. And just like sometimes in families we have people that we might not get along with, right? This extended family, we might have people we might not get along with, or people that might be close to, right? And so the two action items that I've been saying throughout this series, right? Just like when we go to a family barbecue and there's a cousin that we don't know, or there's someone that we don't know, we try to meet them. In our extended family here, if you see someone that you don't know, try to say salams, get to know them. Get to know the name of someone that you don't know, and make dua for them. And make dua for our community, make dua for this extended family, and make dua for our ummah, inshallah. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim alayhi.